Well, hey, howdy, everyone. Welcome to So What, the Marketing Analytics and Insights live show. I am Katie, joined by Chris and John. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Oh, okay.
That totally worked. That totally worked.
All right, fine. You can have that one. We missed you last week. Last week was a U.S. holiday, so we were off keeping all of our fingers and toes by not throwing up. Thank you.
All 10 for everyone.
By not setting off fireworks. But this week, we're talking about how to do an audience analysis. And so we've covered this in various forms over the years. But what we wanted to do with it today is sort of bring it up to the now and walk through how to do an audience analysis using generative AI, because that's the tool of choice for a lot of people. It's more accessible than learning statistics, for example. It can be faster, more efficient. So what we want to do is sort of walk through what it looks like to do a useful, valuable, actionable audience analysis. So what data do you have access to do an audience analysis with? How to use generative AI, and then what action steps you should take. And so this came from a conversation that Chris and I were having earlier this week on the podcast, which you can listen to at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast, where we were talking about how a lot of the younger generations are getting their information from specific influencers. And so, we were talking about, the fictitious Christopher F. Penn instead of Christopher S. Penn. Christopher Fake Penn is if he were a fictitious influencer, and what his responsibilities would be to his audience. First and foremost is understanding who's in that audience so that he can reach them where they are. So that's what we want to do today. So Christopher S. Penn, the real Penn, where would you like to start?
Well, I guess the completely unsurprising, Katie, I'm going to ask you, what is this thing that we're trying to do? So we have brought up the 5 Ps: purpose, people, process, platform, performance. When you think about audience analysis, and particularly in the ways that you as an executive would want to use it to promote the business of Trust Insights, what would you be interested in knowing?
I think I want to know the same things that a lot of people want to know. I want to start with the foundational, like the basics, and I think some of those things should include not necessarily gender, but age. So gender and location to me are less important than the actual generation of the audience, because as we're discovering, as more research is done, that is a strong indicator of what kinds of content we should be creating and what channels we should be creating for. So that's generally where I want to start, is what is the age ranges of the people? And then I want to get into things like, what are they interested in? What do they care about? What are their passions? What's going to resonate with them? And so we can start to get into more of like the ICP, the ideal customer profile kind of metrics. But I think to start, I think it's really helpful to know what age groups people fall into so that you can understand what platforms they're consuming information from. I think that's going to drive a lot of your marketing strategy.
Okay. So I think then the first place to start is not with generative AI. I think that's actually probably the not where we should go. Where you should go, the first place, would be good old-fashioned Google Analytics. Not the most exciting topic these days, but very relevant. So I'm in our Google Analytics property here. I'm in the Explore hub. So on the left-hand side, go to Explore. And I picked out a few metrics. So we have age, gender, interests. We have sessions because we're talking about audience. We're not talking about conversions. We're not talking about sales. We're talking about just audience. So sessions is generally the best metric for audience, because a session has information about how that person started their interactions with you, as opposed to a user, which is the human being themselves, or as opposed to a page view, which is about the content. For audience, it's all about sessions. So I set our time frame to the last 12 months because these days with audience analysis, I wouldn't go back more than 12. 6 to 12 is about right, depending on the size of your site, just because it's been a hell of a 4 years. Right? It's been a wild and crazy 4 years. And so behaviors that that were common in 2021 when we were all living in our basements are very different than behaviors in 2023 when we were out and about, spreading disease to each other again. So looking back at John, so 6 to 12 months is about right. So what we see here is we see a nice bar chart effectively from Google Analytics saying there's a whole bunch of people I don't know anything about because of data privacy stuff. And then these are your breakouts: 25 to 34, 18 to 24, 35 to 44, 45 to 54, 55 to 64, and 65 plus. Mm-hmm. What we see is that the majority, or the plurality of our audience is under the age of 35.
And I think that that's really good information to start with, because we run into this with some of our clients. And, to be fair, we probably fall into the same trap as well, is that we've been doing marketing for so long that even though we think that we're sort of, have our finger on the pulse of, what people want, we're still doing the same things. We're still sending a lot of emails. We're still putting a lot of things on LinkedIn. We're still creating a lot of YouTube videos, and those things are good for some of those audiences. But I don't know that they're good for the younger audiences that we also want to be reaching, the people under 35. Because to be fair, nobody in our company is under 35. And so we don't necessarily know if we send you a bunch of email, is that going to work? And so I think that for me, that's where my head is at, is are we missing the boat on reaching, the majority of our audience, or potential audience, I should say, because we're not delivering them content on the right channels. And I think that that's sort of where I keep getting stuck, is I know what we're doing for marketing. I know what we're doing for marketing is limited because of our resources, but are we making the most of what we have?
Right. I forgot, by the way, a very, very critical thing to remember with your data is make sure that it is good quality. We had an issue in April with some data contamination and so I had to filter that by making sure that it's just our website. But the proportions are still the same, right? 25 to 34, 18 to 24. So again, that top plurality is under the age of 35. People my age and up are in the minority, right? But in a pretty significant minority. So that's who our audience is from an age range. Now, the next thing we can do, just very broadly, let me go ahead and dump this PDF out, is we can swap out our age with our gender, just to take a look at broadly what that looks like. And here we're split 50-50, right down the middle, which is unusual. In the past, it has skewed more heavily male, and now is about even.
So, and I don't want to get too deep down the rabbit hole because I feel like we could, but I'm less interested in the gender identification because I feel like the services that we provide don't cater to one gender or the other. And so I wouldn't necessarily cater our marketing to one gender or the other, or, somewhere in between. So, I mean, am I wrong in thinking that this particular metric doesn't matter to us?
For audience building, it does, because it's who we're attracting, not necessarily on a services basis, not on what to sell, but on, as you mentioned, all the content we're creating, all the places we're putting it. One of the things, and I have no data to prove this, one of the things I think is a contributing factor to this is the fact that we do have a CEO who identifies as female, and we feature you prominently in our podcasts, our live streams, our newsletters and stuff. And that communicates to audiences that this company does not have a problem with a woman leader, for example, and that our content inherently will be supportive of that point of view. Otherwise, we wouldn't be publishing, live streams and podcasts and newsletters with you as the headline act.
Okay, that's fair. Because I'm looking at it in terms of what we're going to create, but I hadn't thought about the representation side of the conversation, which I think does make sense. That said, if it were skewing more male than female, I don't know what we would do to resolve that other than maybe featuring me more. I mean, those are the kinds of things that like we would have to look at and take back and sort of figure out in our planning. So I will be more mindful of this metric moving forward because I hadn't thought about it from that perspective.
The next thing we might want to think about is looking at those interests. What are the interests of our audience? What are the things that what else do they care about besides our content? So this data comes from Google's DoubleClick network. It is, if it's available, it's going to be, in our case, it's about 25% of the data. 75% of the data does not have this attached, but it's a decent representative sample. And what we see are the things that people care about: technology, business professionals, shutterbugs, avid investors, movie lovers, TV lovers, etc. Now, with this data, one of the things you can do is do those splits. You can add in splits to segment it out by gender to see if there are certain topics that resonate more with one than the other. You can also split it out by age and either add that in or do 2 separate assessments so that you get a full understanding of what your audience really actually cares about.
And I feel like, so in Google Analytics 3, it was called the infinity audiences. I feel like
That's
it's an underused part of the system because we tend to skip over what our audience cares about, and we as marketers try to tell them what they should care about. And, how well is that going for people? I don't know. How well is it going for you, John, when you try to tell me what I should care about?
Yeah, no, I can show you the scars from last time we did that path. No, it's true. And it was really interesting to me because this stuff is all based on their ad data. I mean, we've talked before at length about how pretty much Google Analytics is just becoming a tool for the ad network. So they are more than happy to push you this kind of stuff to give you a better idea of, where your audiences are and what kind of things they're interested in. And hopefully you can find some ways to map your product to that. It gives you a chance to have a lot more effective messaging.
Yep. Especially if, and this is a separate rat hole for another time, but you can take these topics and you can use the topics with generative tools to create ad copy for these specific topics that involves your product or your service and the topic, and then deploy that in Google Ads targeted to those specific affinity segments. So, for example, I'm going to use shutterbugs, right? So your ad creative might have a person, with a camera, and the analogy might be, make sure you've got a clear picture of your data, trust insights, and so the ad would be about that, but it would be targeted towards that affinity, knowing that you can target that affinity within Google Ads.
Makes sense. I mean, again, it's sort of, I feel like it's the unsung hero of Google Analytics. It's data that has been in there the entire time, but we often just focus on like sessions and conversions, and we don't take the time to really dig into who are these people who are coming to our website. What did they care about, and how do we keep them?
Exactly. So I think that's obviously relevant and important, is having that information of all that demographic information being available for assessment. So the next thing that you want to do, if we're doing audience, trying to understand our audience, we probably want to spend some time knowing where our audience comes from. So it seems like an obvious thing to say, but let me flip over to this tab here. So this would be your source medium and the traffic, the sessions you get. Where is your traffic coming from? Let me make sure that plug in that host name just to ensure that this is correct. Apply. Okay, so host name contains trust insights. So we have 100,000 sessions here, and we can see that 44,000 that comes from newsletter, 16,000 we don't have data for, it's direct. We have the company newsletter, which has 15,000. Google organic search. We have some mistag stuff from the Almost Time newsletter. We have a couple of spam bots, which is, we know that we were fighting those off last year. And since this data is a year old, 1 year inclusive, we have LinkedIn, which is surprisingly high on this list. Now, granted, out of 100,000 sessions, that's 1.3%, but it's still that's up there. Speaking, Bing, Slack, and so on and so forth. So from this, we have a pretty good sense of that audience. Where are they coming from? So to your point, Katie, when you're saying, well, how are people getting to us? These are the data sources for how they get to us.
I would counter with these are the only data sources that we're publishing content on. And so, we are lightly doing, so what's not represented here, aside from LinkedIn and a little bit of YouTube, is social media. So interestingly, we're not posting anything on Facebook, and yet we're still getting a few people from that. Instagram, I don't see on here. Twitter is still showing
Twitter's
up a
way
bit.
down there.
Yeah. And so,
Instagram is below your website.
Wow. It's concerning.
Well, there's no way out of Instagram, though, right? I mean, that's totally normal.
No, there is. The link in bio.
Yeah, link in bio is the only out.
I don't see TikTok on there, for example. So it's like, the data makes sense because it's where we are. And so I feel like that, to me, and maybe I'm not articulating it, or, maybe I don't know what my question is necessarily, but like, people are coming to our site from where we post data. But if our audience skews younger, where are they? And where do they want to consume stuff from?
Right. Well, we do post to TikTok and Instagram and YouTube and most of the sites. I think the only site where we don't have a lot of heavy publishing right now is like Snapchat, because you'd have to post those stories individually there, and it's a pain in the butt. But for the most part, we cover most of the social networks. The other one we don't publish too aggressively yet, because it's not supported in our schedule, is Threads. But support for that is coming very soon in AgoraPulse, which is the platform that we use. So I would expect to be able to start seeing some of that, with the understanding that appears to be using Instagram's link shortener. So you want to make sure that your UTM tracking codes are solid to account for that. So I think we are in a good number of the places that we can be for the size of team that we have and the resources we have. Could we be doing more with YouTube Shorts, and could we be doing more with more creative uses of TikTok than what we use it for? Yes, absolutely we could. We don't have the bandwidth to support that right now, but we are in enough places. Like we're in we do get traffic from Bing, we do get traffic from LinkedIn and stuff. That makes logical sense. So okay, so that is, I think, a good sampling of understanding the data from Google Analytics. Now, there's a couple other places that I think are worth pulling data from. One of them is Google Search Console. I think if you want to understand your audience, understanding the terms that they're finding your website for is a good idea. And this is, we're not going to be doing an extensive analysis on this. We just want this data because we broadly know the demographics and the interests of people. We know where they came from. We now have some knowledge of the language that they're using for which we get traffic from search. And that's important, just to say, like, yeah, these are the terms that Google associates with us. And what we get clicks for, where people say, yeah, you know what, that looks relevant, I'm going to click on that.
Makes
so
sense.
We'll want that data. And the last set of data that I think is useful for, at least for audiences, understanding what people are telling us. And that can come from a couple different places. Today, we will use, we'll export the data from our contact form on our website. We'll say, I want the data. I want, everyone who's filled out the contact form. Now, here's the catch. About 80% of what comes to our contact form is garbage, right? It's sales pitches and stuff like that. So one of the things that you can and should do is export your contact form stuff and then feed it to generative AI and say, I only want people who are asking sales inquiries about us. Discard, sales pitches to us. I want people who are talking about, and they want help from us to better understand our when people do make the effort to reach out, what is it they're saying? So those are kind of the four big data sources we have. We have Google Analytics data, and I think I think it's fair to say that with the GA data, you can get some useful insights just from that. You don't need AI for that. You can look at it and go, oh, that's interesting.
I would agree with that.
And then we have our contact form data. We have our Google Search Console data. Is there other things that you would be thinking about from an audience perspective that you think is relevant? I can think of one or two other things, but it's beyond the scope of today's show.
Yeah, I think the things that I'm thinking are the same. So I would want to know, who subscribes, to our various things, like who subscribes to the podcast, who subscribes to the newsletter, and then who follows us on social media accounts. But I think
Yep.
to your point, that's beyond the scope of today. But those are the other things that I would want to, if we were doing this like as a project, take the time to find out.
Right, exactly. Yeah, if you were a paying customer of Trust Insights, which you can be by going to this link, it would include those. The other thing I would do is I would dump the contents of our Slack group, Analytics for Marketers, right? I would dump the contents and pull out the conversations, the public conversations for the last year, because again, that's a part of our audience and knowing what people are talking about, especially in the off-topic channels, the pets channel, the music, the books channel. I think those are things that are useful insights from a subset of our audience. I would call it our most loyal audience. I think that would lend some color to those affinities and interests.
I think that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, so what do we do with all this stuff?
You tell me. That's why you're here, Chris.
Fine. Let's go to Google Gemini and start asking questions. As we always do, we got to prime the model. So we're going to start off by saying you are an AMA award-winning chief marketing officer with specialization in audience analysis, cohort analysis, demographics, customer journeys. What are your best practices for understanding the makeup of a company's audience based on digital data? So we start off with our first question, which is a priming question, to load the basic context for the task that we're setting out in front of us. And it's going to go through and spit out a bunch of stuff. This is following, if not tuned in before, this is following the Trust Insights Pair framework. If you go to trustinsights.ai/pair, there's a PDF you can download, totally free, no form to fill out, no blood to give, and you can follow along with the steps. The next step question is going to ask is, great, what are some things that less experienced marketers get wrong about audience analysis with digital data? So this prompt provides additional content for the model, but provides what's called contrastive prompting. And this is essentially helping the model understand what not to do. And so this question, I think, is probably the second most important question. Now we're going to add a third question on this. This is the refresh phase of the framework. Saying, great. What tips and tricks do you know as an experienced CMO that others might not, that we have not discussed yet? So now we're going to push aside the obvious basic stuff and have it dig into additional topics, additional concepts and stuff that we might want to incorporate into this analysis. So now we've got the framework for really good audience analysis. And again, if this was something that you wanted to reuse over and over again, you would want to now turn this into system instructions. You would say, help me build a GPT for this in OpenAI's GPT, or a gem in Google Gemini. But you would want it to consolidate all this knowledge. For today, we're going to leave it as is. You can see we've consumed only about 1,800 tokens. It's about 1,500 words. That's a good starting point for this. So we're now going to say, I'm going to provide you some data based on these best practices. Help me assemble an understanding of my audience. And I've said, write an outline format using Markdown. The reason for it is because that is a programming, well, it's a formatting language that is super easy for machines to understand. And it is compatible with the way that Gemini in particular spits out data. If you're using ChatGPT, it does this automatically, and not necessarily well. I don't love the way ChatGPT's formatting comes out, but that's fine. If you're using Anthropic Claude, it does something similar. It doesn't really matter on the formatting side. So let's go ahead and hit go on. So I took PDFs while we were going through Google Analytics. I was taking PDF exports from that dashboard. You can get that data programmatically through the API if you're a coder, but I figured for today's show we would just do it at the non-coder way. So we had PDFs of each of the sections we looked at. I took the distilled down sales pitches and I took a text file from Google Search Console. So those are the data sets that we've split out here. So let's take a look here. The Trust Insights audience analysis. We have data source methodology. Here's the gender demographics. Yep. Age distribution followed by there. Behavior, acquisition channels, almost timely, website engagement, qualitative. Let's see. So it is essentially creating the recipe. Okay.
So I have a question, Chris.
Yes.
So you just did something that I am a little surprised at. You took PDFs of the data and not CSV files of the data. Is there a reason for that? Because my instinct would have been CSV files, not PDFs.
The reason I did that, I always do the Chat GPT. I conditionally do that with Google Gemini. The reason for that is if you provided a CSV, the tools, in an attempt to be helpful, start loading Python and try to write code to interpret it. I'm like, no, I just want you to understand the text, and I don't want you to try to build software around this. ChatGPT is the worst at doing that.
Okay, that's helpful. That explains what I was running into when I was working on our project yesterday. I'd given it CSV files and it was taking forever because it was building Python code and I couldn't figure out why it wouldn't just do exactly what you're saying, which is to just, okay, but like, can you read the thing or no? So that's a really interesting pro tip that I wasn't aware of. So I was doing that same thing because I thought, well, the CSV file must be easier for it to read, not a PDF. So pro tip, if you don't want your generative AI to start building Python code, you just want it to answer your question, use a PDF, not a CSV.
Exactly. So now it's spitting out here basically the analysis of the data and trying to sew it together. So here's the methodology. Here are the limitations. Quantitative analysis, female. Location data was not provided, so we might want to provide the location data because it does say that might be useful. Behavioral channel, email is the dominant channel. That again, this is not a huge surprise. Website engagement, we have sales inquiries, the different types, so general consulting and training, speaking engagements, and specific requests. Industry-wise, marketing agencies, higher education, industrial distributors, real estate, and so on and so forth. That's all coming from our website contact form. Now, again, as we were saying earlier, if this was a paying client, we'd be pulling that data out of HubSpot as well because we wanted to know the specific industries. That data, by the way, you can export from HubSpot via API. Integrating AI into marketing, navigating GA4, developing AI strategy. Those are the kinds of things that people are interested in. And then it attempted to build some personas, Event Emily, Corporate Cafe. Showcase GA4 expertise, develop AI training programs for agencies, actively pursue speaking opportunities, refine website content messaging, leverage email marketing, expand data collection. So that's its analysis based on the pieces we provided. This is true of all generative AI, but especially in a situation like this, the more data you provide, the better it's going to get. So it even identified it's hamstrung by some of the data we didn't give it.
What's interesting, because we've done previous episodes, and we were talking about this yesterday too, of ideal customer profiles. This is very similar to an ideal customer profile, but what's different, at least, from where I sit, is that the ideal customer profile is who we want to attract. And this audience analysis is who we are attracting. And now we just need to sort of do like the Venn diagram of the two.
Funny you mentioned that. All right. So, great.
It's almost like I've worked with you for 10 years.
This is excellent analysis of the kind of audience we are currently attracting. I'm now going to provide you with our ideal customer profile, the kind of audience we want to attract. Read through our ICP and then compare and contrast our audience profile with our ICP. Now let's go into Gemini, go into my drive. I'm going to move this off screen here because there's stuff that people, the general public, should not see. Enjoy my cats.
John, I feel like you and I should have like little skits prepared for when Chris is computing stuff and it's just kind of like dead air, because it happens enough that we should have some sort of like a something ready.
Dance break.
Little dance break.
This segment brought to you by Giphy.
Oh,
right.
Lord.
What do we got?
So again, one of the nice things, and this is, it's a semi-pro tip. You should have things like your ideal customer profile and your audience profile and things in PDFs or text files or Markdown or something like that handy, so you can just drag and drop it right in. One of the reasons I love using Gemini is because it's integrated into the rest of Google Workspace. So I know where in our Google Drive this stuff is. I can just plop it right in, and I don't have to sit here spending time building it. It's canned. It's ready to go. All right, let's see. Similarities: focus on data-driven marketing, interested in AI and advanced analytics, professional roles, emphasis on business impact. Differences: your current audience appears to be more diverse in terms of industry representation, whereas your ICP prioritizes specific sectors. Your existing audience seems to include a wider range of company sizes, where the ICP is focused on mid-market to enterprise. Your ICP emphasizes actively using CRM and marketing automation, which might not be as prevalent in your current audience. Digital transformation maturity: your ICP targets companies actively engaged in digital transformation. This level of maturity may not be as widespread in your current audience. Actionable insights: refine targeting and messaging, develop content tailored to the ICP pain points, identify key decision makers, leverage industry specific channels, and highlight your digital transformation expertise. So it is saying that we're attracting an audience that may not be as focused as we want it to be, and these are the 5 things that we should be doing to do better at that.
Which is definitely interesting, and I think that that's what opens up those really good marketing planning conversations, because I can see value in attracting all of these types of people, because awareness is at the top of the funnel. You want to have good awareness. And do you need to be as specific if your purchasing audience is a little bit more niche? I don't know. And so those are the things that, I would take this and take it back and start to map out, where do we narrow down the audience and the customer journey? Is it okay that we're getting a wider audience at the awareness phase? And then as they go, like, how do we narrow them down through the different phases of the customer journey to get to the ICP? So the ICP needs to be built into the awareness phase, but it doesn't exclusively need to be the awareness phase.
And that's a really, I think, very critical point. The critical point that you manufacture there is that there will be people who are in your audience who are supporters, fans, boosters. They're never going to buy anything from you. They don't need to, but they do need to talk about you. They do need to refer you to people who can make those buying decisions. And so one of the dangers of this sort of analysis is that you get so laser focused on one type of person that you forget, particularly in B2B, but any complex sale, including things like real estate, higher education, etc. There's a lot of ways to influence a decision maker. And it may not be the obvious, connect this person on LinkedIn and send them a FedEx and stuff like that. We've been in situations where an executive says to the intern, hey, make me a short list of companies that do this. And the intern goes and Googles it. Well, if you want to be on that short list, you could try to influence the chief executive, or you could influence the intern, but through search and content marketing. So what I did was I said, I like this. Give me some ideas for highlighting digital transformation. And I gave it our services pages as well, so that it had some additional ways to incorporate our expertise. The 5 levels of digital transformation for marketers: data chaos to customer clarity, beyond vanity metrics, case studies, host a webinar like AI for digital transformation, a roadmap for marketers, white papers and guides, service specific strategic consultation. Here's some ways to change our services, the way we talk about them, as a way to show people our digital transformation expertise, showcase our marketing mix modeling capabilities, which, by the way, are better than ever thanks to generative AI, data intelligence. So there's a lot of ways that the tool, given the data we've given it and its background knowledge, it now says, here's how you should be doing your marketing to broaden awareness of our digital transformation capabilities.
And see, Chris is smart. I know he's saving all of this because I'm going to ask him for all of it afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So that is the framework for audience analysis. The hardest part by far is getting all the data together.
Oh yeah.
Right. The prompting, we've been prompting this thing for 11 minutes now. It took 25 minutes to assemble the data, and from 3 very easy sources. That does not count our CRM, our email marketing system, our social media management system. Some things that we might include if we want to do a deeper dive, go into our AI transcript system and pull all the sales input calls we've ever done in the last year and put all that data in. So there's so many sources of information you can bring in, surveying people and doing focus groups and one-on-one interviews and shadowing, whatever the business you're in. Gathering that data is what's going to feed this modeling capability. And if you can, the more you have, the better you're going to do.
But I think that goes back to where we started the episode, which is with the 5 Ps, to really understand what is the question you're trying to answer. Because you're right, there's a lot of different places where you can get data, but they might not all be useful data sets to answer the question. So for me, I wanted to understand, sort of more of like who's in our awareness stage of the funnel. How are they consuming content? What are we missing? And when I go through the analysis, I'm going to find that information. I'm not looking for who's converting. That's a different part of the funnel, and that would change the kind of data that I might be looking for, the different metrics. And so doing your requirements up front, even for something like this, is essential, because you're right. Gathering the data is what's going to take you the longest. And if you're gathering the wrong data, you're not going to get to the answers that you're looking for.
Exactly. And even with the tools that you have, there are ways to segment that data out. So one of the questions that, Katie, you always ask me is like, yeah, your newsletter is great. It's got almost 300,000 subscribers, and every Sunday you harass the internet with it. But is it the right audience? And one of the things that you can do, for example, in GA4, is you can say, okay, well, now let me restrict this down to maybe just the services pages on our website. And do we then see those source mediums change for the page that where there's high sales intent? Your team page, your about us page, your products and services page, your pricing page, if you got a page on pricing, and your contact page. So those are the 4 pages where there's higher sales intent, and you might want to build a filter or do it through the API for something like Google Analytics to say, how does the audience change from everybody to high sales intent clusters of content?
I could derail things, but I'm not going to.
You got time.
Why is the About Us page considered high sales intent? Because, I mean, again, I'm an N of 1, so this just might be my own personal opinion. I have more of just a natural curiosity, or sometimes I'm like, who is this jackass? And I go to the About page, but I have no intent on buying. If anything, it's doing the opposite. And so why is this is what I mean. Why is going to an About Us page considered high sales intent?
by itself it's not, but in a visit where there's also a visit to a product or service page, it is. That it's just statistically that has been our experience, and we've seen that in software like Demandbase, for example, which will highlight like, hey, the pages that people visit before converting are these pages. In fact, we used to do that with our old digital customer journey, and you could see the pages. The About Us, the team page, is very high up, and we know this anecdotally too, because in I would say half of the input calls that we've had with prospective clients, one of the questions they'll say is, okay, this is great. So who on your team is doing the actual work once we engage, right? We used to get that all the time at the PR agency, and that was always an awkward moment because it'd be like, not us. We're just here to sell you something. And then, and then somebody else is, thankfully, Trust Insights, this is it. This is what you get.
John, do you feel like you have a good grasp on who makes up the marketing over coffee audience? Or is this a type of analysis that you would find valuable?
It's very similar. It's pretty much the same audience, I would say. I mean, there's not, none of the stats look different, and it's all the same thing of it's people who are looking for cutting edge marketing. I mean, it totally matches the mission of both places. It's just weird how for marketing over coffee, it's so convoluted in that, we're only interested in 0.03% of the audience, which is the folks that want to advertise back to the same group, which is, an absurdly tiny slice. But otherwise it's more of the same thing of, how focused do you get and how broad of a net do you cast? You're kind of always fighting that challenge of, you do want to get the interns and just the random public because they make references and they'll remember your name and pass you on when the time comes.
So one thing that you mentioned is really important, and we haven't talked about it, and we might want to talk about it either on this episode or a future episode, is all of this data and everything that we've put together is really good. It's very useful. It tells us who is in the audience and understanding the audience. It does not tell us who's not in the audience. It does not tell us who might be valuable that we're missing. Is there a segment of the audience that we're not paying enough attention to, but there's a hint of it in the data? Like, you got 11 visits from Pinterest, but you haven't posted on Pinterest in 6 years. So is there a possibility that data from Pinterest, that Pinterest might be a valuable platform? And one of the challenges that a lot of companies have that we don't have, thankfully, is we have access to multiple GA accounts. So we have Marketing Over Coffee, we have my personal account, we have the Trust Insights account. And so you would actually, one of the things you might want to do is do a comparative analysis to say, is there a different audience on Christopher S. Penn than there is on Trust Insights? And if so, is that audience potentially valuable? Should we be doing more to address it? Is there a different audience on Marketing Over Coffee that we're not talking to? You can also, with some of this data, you could use SEO tools, SEMrush, Ahrefs, etc., to say, okay, well, here's our general starting keyword list. What are the related terms? And then say, well, why are those not in our Google Search Console? Is there an audience that would use that language? And this is where language models are really powerful. Is there an audience that uses that language that we're not talking to because we don't know what we don't know? We don't know that blank spot, that empty space.
So you definitely just hit on a couple of things that maybe for a future episode we could tackle. But I mean, you're right. I always want to know, since we do have these multiple streams of audiences coming in, where the value lies, for lack of a better term. So you have an audience, John has an audience with Marketing Over Coffee, and so on and so forth. So I want to know, within those different streams, like who's a buying audience and who's a here for the ride audience. And because, I mean, both are important, but we're going to treat them differently. We need to get better at segmenting versus everybody gets the same thing. And this is, again, sort of where we started on the podcast earlier this week. It gets into that personalization. And so if we're sending the same message to everyone, then we're missing a good part. If we're sending the same message to the different age groups, different generations, we're missing a good part. We're missing the boat basically by not tailoring our messaging to these different segments of the audience. And that's something that I would want to use this analysis for. That's my action. It's like, great, what do I need to do? I need to understand how to reach these people where they are, not ask them to meet me, but I need to meet them.
So I asked these people, well, oh my God, that was terrible English. I said to the model, okay, here's a strategic question. The white space, the unaddressed, what part of the audience might we be missing that would eventually be a valuable audience based on all the data we've uploaded? And it came back very quickly and said, you're missing Katie. You're missing the data savvy executive, the CEO, the COO, the CFO. These people are expected to be data savvy. Here's the evidence. Multiple inquiries come from CEOs and founders, speaking topics. Your aligns with executive concerns. Here's what this audience needs. Not data science, aka not me, but data strategy. They don't need to code, but they need to understand what's possible with data, how to ask the right questions, how to foster data-informed culture, bridging the gap between technical and business, case studies that speak their language. This is using the language model and essentially asking it, hey, here's this data set, and you know all language. What is this data set not have in it within this particular probabilistic scenario of marketing and AI? And here's how to reach them: executive level content, white papers, exec summaries, tailored briefings, speaking at executive events instead of marketing conferences, partnership with executive coaching firms to help introduce the company to these executives through their coaches. And then here's some, it gives very specific examples of how you might want to do that kind of targeting, the kind of executive networking. One of the things that is always a push and pull, sort of a balance that we struggle with from time to time, is figuring out how do we balance the different voices of the team at Trust Insights. This, to me, feels like the thing that, Katie, you should hang your hat on. From one CEO to another, here's how Katie successfully manages an incredibly technically complex environment for the company and for clients. Here's how Katie thinks about data strategy as opposed to data science. Nobody cares about whether DPO or SPPO is a better model for optimizing a language model. Direct preference optimization versus never mind. I care about that, but no one else does. But knowing like what should we be doing? I mean, one of the big things, if you go into some of the CEO forums online, especially the ones that are relatively safe spaces, people are saying, I don't know what the F to do about AI. Everyone says it's important, and I don't get it. And I know I should get it. How do I get smart on this? So as we think about, Katie, the kind of content that we should be creating, but especially you in the newsletter and in the podcast and stuff, and your own content on LinkedIn, got to help your fellow CEOs out.
All right. You heard it here first. Less Chris Penn.
That's right. I got my own stuff.
We're sticking him back in a box. Side note, when we worked at the agency, we did try to develop Chris in a box, and it did not go well because you can't cage the animal.
I am ungovernable.
I think it's a good place to stop.
It is a good place to stop. Any final thoughts?
I got some work to do.
Dig around and, make a mess. Go get in trouble.
Yeah.
Stuff.
All right. We will talk to you all on the next one. Thanks for watching today. Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you're watching it. For more resources and to learn more, check out the Trust Insights podcast at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast and our weekly email newsletter at trustinsights.ai/newsletter. Got questions about what you saw in today's episode? Join our free Analytics for Marketers Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. See you next time.